Many people with diabetes go to bed with blood sugar that looks fine, only to wake up confused and frustrated by a high morning reading. This pattern is extremely common, and it's one of the most misunderstood parts of blood sugar control. The problem isn't always what you ate the night before. It's how your body processes glucose differently at night and in the early morning hours. Hormones, insulin sensitivity, liver glucose release, and even sleep quality all play a role, and they don't behave the same way they do during the day. This is why some people see spikes after dinner, while others wake up high even without eating anything overnight. If you don't understand what's happening during this window, blood sugar can feel unpredictable no matter how careful you are. In this video, I'll explain why blood sugar behaves differently at night and in the morning, what most people misunderstand about these spikes, and how to reduce them safely and consistently. In the next section, I'll explain what actually changes in your body after sunset and why this sets the stage for morning highs. Blood sugar control is not the same at 8 p.m. as it is at 10 a.m., even if you eat the exact same meal. The reason is that glucose regulation follows a daily rhythm. After sunset, several systems shift at the same time. Insulin sensitivity drops, digestion slows, and the liver becomes more active in maintaining blood sugar during the overnight fast. When you combine those shifts with insulin resistance, the result is a very common pattern. Blood sugar rises later than expected, stays elevated longer than it should, and then shows up as a high morning reading. The first major change is insulin sensitivity. During the day, your muscles are generally more responsive to insulin, especially if you've moved around, walked, or done any activity. Muscles act like a sponge for glucose. They pull sugar out of the bloodstream and store it as glycogen. At night, when activity drops, muscles take up less glucose. That means the same amount of carbohydrate produces a bigger glucose response, because less of that glucose is being absorbed quickly by working muscle tissue. This is where most people make a mistake. They think the quality of the meal is the only thing that matters, but timing changes how your body processes that meal. A bowl of rice at lunch may behave very differently than rice at dinner, even if the portion size is the same. At night, your baseline insulin effectiveness is lower, so glucose stays in circulation longer. The next shift is digestion. In the evening, gastric emptying slows and the entire digestive process becomes more gradual. That can sound like a good thing, because slower digestion can reduce sharp spikes. But it has a downside. Glucose from dinner may enter the bloodstream later and for longer. Instead of peaking quickly and coming down, blood sugar can rise slowly for hours. Many people check their blood sugar before bed and think, "I'm good." Then the glucose release continues in the background while they sleep. In a moment, I'll explain why this delayed digestion is one of the biggest reasons people wake up high even when bedtime numbers look fine. Fat and large portions make this more likely. A higher fat dinner can slow absorption and shift the blood sugar rise later into the night. And even a healthy dinner, if it's oversized, still creates a large total glucose load that has to be processed while insulin sensitivity is lower. That's why some people don't see the spike right after dinner. They see it at 1 a.m., 3 a.m., or the moment they wake up. Now add the liver. The liver's job during fasting is to keep your blood sugar from dropping too low by releasing stored glucose and producing new glucose when needed. Overnight, this system becomes more important because you're not eating. In a metabolically healthy person, insulin signals the liver to release only an appropriate amount. But with insulin resistance, that brake is weaker. The liver can release glucose even when levels are already high, which pushes morning readings upward. This is the part most doctors don't explain clearly. Sometimes a high morning number is not caused by what you ate, but by what your liver produced while you slept. Hormones make this even stronger. Cortisol and growth hormone rise naturally during the night and early morning to prepare you to wake up. These hormones are not bad, they're normal, but they reduce insulin sensitivity and encourage the liver to release more glucose. In someone with insulin resistance, that normal hormonal rise can translate into an exaggerated glucose rise. This is a big reason fasting blood sugar can be high even after a careful dinner. Sleep quality matters too. If sleep is shallow or interrupted, cortisol tends to stay elevated. Poor sleep increases insulin resistance the next day and makes the liver more reactive overnight. Even if you don't consciously feel stressed, the body interprets fragmented sleep as stress, and the glucose system responds accordingly. In the next section, I'll show you the most common dinner patterns that trigger these nighttime shifts and the simple fixes that work without starving yourself or doing extreme restrictions. So when you see nighttime or morning spikes, don't assume you failed. Think of it like this. Night is a different metabolic environment. Lower insulin sensitivity, slower digestion, increased liver output, and hormonal changes all stack together. Once you understand those rules, you can adjust dinner timing, portion size, meal composition, and evening routines in a way that makes blood sugar more stable overnight and more predictable in the morning. Once you understand how the body changes at night, the next step is recognizing how common dinner habits interact with those changes. Many people believe they're doing everything right in the evening, eating healthy, avoiding sugar, and stopping food early. Yet blood sugar still rises overnight. This usually isn't because of one bad food, but because several small habits stack together at the wrong time. One of the biggest factors is portion size at dinner. Even when foods are nutritious, eating a large volume late in the day increases the total glucose load entering the bloodstream. At night, insulin sensitivity is already reduced, so the body struggles to handle that load efficiently. Instead of glucose being absorbed and cleared, it lingers and slowly accumulates over several hours. This becomes especially important with carbohydrate-heavy dinners. Foods like rice, pasta, potatoes, bread, or even large portions of fruit may not cause immediate spikes, but they continue releasing glucose long after the meal is finished. The delayed absorption lines up with the period when insulin is least effective. This is where most people make a mistake. They judge a meal by how blood sugar looks 1 or 2 hours later. At night, that window is misleading. The real impact often shows up 4 to 8 hours later, right in the middle of sleep or first thing in the morning. Another common issue is imbalanced meals. Dinners that are low in protein or fiber digest faster and release glucose more quickly. Without enough protein to slow absorption and stabilize insulin response, blood sugar rises more easily and stays elevated longer. Fiber plays a similar role by slowing digestion and smoothing glucose release. However, there's a balance. Very high-fat dinners can delay digestion too much. While fat reduces immediate spikes, it can push glucose absorption deep into the night. This creates a long, slow rise that overlaps with hormonal glucose release from the liver. When these two sources of glucose overlap, blood sugar remains elevated for hours. In a moment, I'll explain why eating healthy fats late at night can still backfire for some people. Meal timing also matters more than most people realize. Eating dinner late shortens the fasting window before sleep. When food is still being digested as you fall asleep, the body has to manage digestion, glucose absorption, and hormonal shifts at the same time. This overload increases the likelihood of nighttime spikes. Late dinners also reduce the opportunity for light movement afterward. Even gentle activity, like walking or standing, helps muscles absorb glucose. Sitting or lying down immediately after eating removes that glucose sink. Without muscle uptake, more sugar stays in circulation. Snacking after dinner compounds the problem. Even small snacks, especially those containing carbohydrates, restart digestion and insulin release at a time when the body's trying to transition into a fasting state. This keeps blood sugar elevated longer and increases liver glucose output later in the night. This is the part most doctors don't explain clearly. It's not just what you eat, it's how late, how much, and how balanced the meal is relative to your nighttime metabolism. Alcohol deserves special mention. While alcohol may temporarily lower blood sugar, it disrupts liver glucose regulation later in the night. As alcohol is processed, the liver shifts priorities, which can lead to unstable glucose release hours later. This often shows up as higher morning readings. Stress during the evening also plays a role. Emotional stress, screen exposure, or poor sleep preparation raises cortisol levels. Elevated cortisol reduces insulin sensitivity and primes the liver to release more glucose overnight, even if dinner was well planned. In the next section, I'll show you the simple, realistic adjustments that help stabilize blood sugar after dinner, without skipping meals or following extreme rules. Understanding these dinner-related triggers gives you control. You don't need perfection. Small changes in portion, size, meal balance, timing, and evening routines can dramatically reduce nighttime glucose rises and make morning blood sugar far more predictable. Once you understand why blood sugar behaves differently after dinner, the next step is knowing what actually helps in real life. Nighttime control is not about forcing blood sugar down. It's about preventing prolonged elevations that quietly continue while you sleep and then show up as high morning readings. One of the most effective fixes is adjusting portion size at dinner. This does not mean skipping meals or eating too little. It means slightly reducing the total glucose load entering the bloodstream at a time when insulin sensitivity is already lower. Even a modest reduction in portion size can significantly reduce how long blood sugar stays elevated overnight. This is especially important for carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are not inherently bad, but at night they require more insulin to process. When insulin sensitivity is reduced, excess carbohydrates linger in the bloodstream longer. By slightly reducing carbohydrate portions and increasing protein or fiber, you reduce the burden on insulin during a vulnerable metabolic window. This is where most people make a mistake. They assume that if a food is healthy, portion size no longer matters. But at night, timing changes the rules. The body simply does not handle large glucose loads as efficiently. Meal balance is just as important as portion size. Protein slows digestion, supports satiety, and reduces the need for large carbohydrate servings. Fiber from vegetables further slows glucose absorption and helps smooth blood sugar release over time. Balanced meals reduce both sharp spikes and delayed rises that occur hours later. However, balance matters in both directions. Very high-fat dinners can delay digestion too much. While fat reduces immediate spikes, it can shift glucose absorption deeper into the night, overlapping with liver glucose release and hormonal changes. This combination often leads to sustained overnight elevations rather than a single spike. In a moment, I'll explain why eating earlier is one of the simplest ways to reduce nighttime blood sugar without changing what you eat. Meal timing plays a powerful role. Eating dinner earlier gives the body time to digest and absorb glucose before insulin sensitivity declines further and before sleep begins. Even moving dinner earlier by 60 to 90 minutes can noticeably reduce overnight glucose levels. This allows digestion to occur while insulin is still relatively more effective. Light movement after dinner is another underestimated tool. Muscle contractions help move glucose into cells independently of insulin. This means even gentle activity can lower blood sugar when insulin is struggling. Walking, standing, or doing light household tasks for 10 to 20 minutes after dinner can significantly reduce how much glucose remains in circulation. This does not require exercise. It simply requires avoiding complete inactivity. Sitting or lying down immediately after dinner removes one of the body's most effective glucose-clearing mechanisms at night. Late-night snacking is another major factor. Snacking restarts digestion and insulin release when the body is trying to transition into a fasting state. This prolongs glucose absorption and increases liver glucose production later in the night. Even small snacks can disrupt this process if they contain carbohydrates. This is the part most doctors don't explain clearly. Nighttime hunger is often not true hunger. It's frequently a response to earlier blood sugar instability, stress, or habit rather than a real need for fuel. Sleep preparation also plays a critical role. Poor sleep increases cortisol levels, which directly worsen insulin resistance and stimulate liver glucose release. Reducing screen exposure, keeping consistent bedtimes, and creating calming evening routines lowers stress hormones and improves overnight glucose regulation. Hydration supports stability as well. Mild dehydration concentrates blood glucose and increases stress hormone activity. Drinking water earlier in the evening supports better glucose balance without disrupting sleep. These adjustments are small, but they work best together. Slightly smaller portions, balanced meals, earlier timing, light movement, reduced snacking, and better sleep preparation reinforce each other. You do not need perfection. Consistency matters far more than intensity. In the next section, I'll explain how to identify which of these fixes matters most for you and how to use your morning readings to fine-tune nighttime control. Most people with diabetes focus heavily on their morning blood sugar. It's the first number they see, and it often sets the emotional tone for the entire day. When that number's high, it can feel discouraging, even if everything seemed fine the night before. But morning blood sugar is not a random outcome. It is the result of what happened during the previous several hours while the body was resting, digesting, and regulating glucose in the background. When blood sugar remains elevated for extended periods overnight, the liver responds differently. The liver's role during fasting is to maintain adequate glucose levels for the brain. However, when glucose regulation is unstable, the liver may continue releasing sugar even when it isn't needed. This keeps baseline blood sugar higher by the time you wake up. This is why improving nighttime stability often has a greater impact on morning readings than changing breakfast alone. Morning blood sugar is not just a fasting number. It's a reflection of digestion, insulin sensitivity, liver output, hormonal activity, and sleep quality working together. This is where many people misread the results. They see a high morning number and immediately blame dinner or assume their diabetes is getting worse. In reality, the issue is often not what was eaten, but how glucose was processed over time. When nighttime blood sugar is smoother, without long periods of elevation, the liver receives a clearer signal to slow glucose release. Insulin, even if less effective, can still exert enough control to prevent excessive output. Over time, this leads to lower and more predictable fasting readings. In a moment, I'll explain how to use morning numbers as feedback instead of frustration. Understanding patterns is far more useful than reacting to single readings. If fasting blood sugar improves on nights when dinner's earlier, portions are smaller, or light movement is added, that tells you something valuable about your body. These patterns reveal which adjustments matter most for your individual metabolism. It's also important to separate two common causes of morning highs. One is poor nighttime control, where glucose remains elevated for hours before sleep. The other is the dawn phenomenon, where hormones released in the early morning stimulate glucose production. These two often overlap, but they are not the same problem. Improving nighttime stability reduces the overall glucose load and often softens the impact of dawn-related hormone release. Sleep quality amplifies everything. Poor sleep raises cortisol levels, which worsens insulin resistance and increases liver glucose production. Even if food choices are consistent, disrupted sleep can undo progress. Over several nights of better sleep, insulin sensitivity improves slightly, stress hormones decrease, and morning blood sugar begins to trend downward. This is the part most doctors don't emphasize clearly. Morning blood sugar is a trend shaped over days, not a single night. One high reading does not mean failure. It means the system needs adjustment. Using morning numbers effectively means looking at them alongside nighttime habits. Ask simple questions. Was dinner earlier or later? Was the portion larger than usual? Was there movement after eating? How was sleep quality? Over time, these questions provide clarity instead of stress. Consistency matters more than intensity. Small improvements applied most nights, earlier meals, balanced portions, light movement, better sleep preparation, compound over time. These habits reduce overnight glucose production and improve fasting levels without extreme measures. When nighttime blood sugar becomes more stable, mornings stop feeling unpredictable. The body begins the day closer to balance instead of recovery. That shift makes daily blood sugar management easier, energy more consistent, and progress easier to sustain. Understanding this connection changes how you approach diabetes. Nighttime control sets the stage, and when that stage is stable, morning numbers follow naturally. Nighttime and morning blood sugar spikes are frustrating, but they're not random. They're the result of how your body processes glucose differently after sunset. With lower insulin sensitivity, slower digestion, increased liver glucose release, and natural hormonal shifts during sleep. The good news is that this means control is possible. Small, consistent adjustments, like earlier dinners, balanced portions, light movement, and better sleep routines, work with your body's nighttime metabolism instead of fighting it. Over time, these changes reduce overnight glucose elevation and lead to more predictable morning readings. Remember, progress doesn't come from perfection. It comes from patterns. When you understand what your body is doing overnight, morning numbers become feedback instead of frustration. If this video helped clarify why blood sugar behaves differently at night and in the morning, consider subscribing for more science-based diabetes